Listen closely, because something is changing right now. And if you truly understand it, if you can feel it deep within yourself, your entire reality can start moving in directions you never thought possible. There is already a version of you living differently, a version of you who already experiences abundance, makes decisions with confidence, and wakes up with a quiet, powerful sense of certainty. I am a multimillionaire, not someday, not after years of struggle, not after waiting for the perfect moment. From today, you begin thinking from that identity. But here is where things get interesting. Wealth does not begin where most people have been taught to look. And that is exactly why so many people spend their whole lives searching for it without ever understanding where it truly starts. You were taught to believe wealth begins with numbers: your bank account, your salary, your business, your opportunities. So you constantly check, measure, compare, and calculate without even noticing it. You let those numbers decide what you believe is possible for you. But here is the truth you need to hear. Those numbers do not create your identity. Your identity shapes the numbers you create. And once you understand that, the entire game begins to shift. Stay with me, because this next part is where the real shift begins. If wealth was simply about money, then everyone with access, education, connections, or opportunity would automatically become wealthy. But that is not what happens. Some people start with almost nothing and eventually build extraordinary lives. Others start with more than enough and somehow lose everything they have. So what creates the difference? This is the part most people overlook. Wealth is not only something you possess, it is also a state of being. It shows in the way you think when nobody is watching. It is revealed in the decisions you make when the future is uncertain. It appears in the way you carry yourself when there is still no visible proof that things are changing. And now comes the uncomfortable question. Who do you believe you are when nothing around you is confirming that belief yet? Think about that carefully, because your answer may be controlling far more of your life than you realize. If deep inside you see yourself as someone who always struggles, someone who is constantly trying to survive, someone who is waiting for a lucky break, then even when a real opportunity shows up, something inside you may hesitate. You question it. You overthink it. You become afraid of making the wrong move. You pull yourself backward, not because you are incapable, not because you lack talent, but because your internal identity does not yet match the result you say you want. Now imagine what happens when that identity begins to change, even just a little. Your behavior starts shifting without you having to constantly force yourself. You begin making decisions with greater speed. You trust your judgment more. You stop looking outside yourself for endless permission. You stop repeatedly asking, "Can I really do this?" And something stronger begins to take its place. "Of course I can." That difference may sound small, but it can completely change the way you move through life. You walk differently. You speak differently. You respond differently. You notice opportunities you once ignored because you were too focused on what was missing. You become willing to take action before everything is perfectly certain. And this does not mean pretending that money is already sitting in your account when it is not. It means building the mindset, discipline, confidence, and decision-making patterns that support the life you want to build. You begin acting from possibility instead of limitation. You begin expecting yourself to solve problems instead of immediately assuming they are impossible. And once that happens, something very interesting starts unfolding. Your outer actions begin reflecting your inner belief. Your choices change, your habits change, your standards change, your response to setbacks changes. And when those things change consistently, your results can begin changing too. But there is another layer to this, and it is the part most people never notice. Your identity is not changed by repeating a sentence once. It is strengthened every time you think, choose, act, and respond like the person you are becoming. That is where the real transformation begins. You do not have to become wealthy first in order to feel wealthy. You have to begin feeling it first so you can grow into it. This is where the whole picture starts to change, because when you honestly begin seeing yourself as someone who already thinks and operates at that level, your mind stops searching for reasons it cannot happen and starts looking for ways to make it possible. Stay with me here, because this part matters. Your brain constantly tries to stay consistent with the person you believe yourself to be. So if you keep saying, "I'm not there yet," your mind will keep collecting evidence that you are behind. If you keep saying, "I'm becoming," you may keep placing the results somewhere ahead of you. But when you begin to say and genuinely feel, "This is who I am," something deeper starts to move. You notice possibilities you once overlooked. You communicate differently. You carry a quiet confidence that other people can feel, even if they cannot explain exactly what has changed. And little by little, your outside world can begin responding to the person you are becoming. But here is something most people never understand. In the beginning, nothing around you may look different at all. That is the test. Can you hold the new identity when the evidence has not arrived yet? Can you stay steady while your circumstances still look exactly the same? Because when you can, you stop letting life control your inner state. You stop reacting to every temporary result. You begin choosing your direction from within. And this next part is where it gets even more powerful. Picture this for a moment. You wake up tomorrow and something feels different. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just a quiet certainty inside you. You no longer question your value. You no longer make yourself smaller when making important decisions. You stop waiting for someone else to approve your next move. You simply move with the calm confidence of someone who already knows who they are. And as time passes, that feeling becomes normal. Opportunities seem to appear at the right moments. Conversations change. People respond to you differently. Peace begins opening doors you never expected. It may feel almost too perfectly timed, but it is not about random luck. It is about alignment between who you believe you are and how you live. Because wealth was never really hiding from you. You were learning how to become the person capable of recognizing, managing, and receiving it. You may have been chasing something that was closer than you realized. Strange, isn't it? Spending years trying to become somebody, only to discover that the deepest change was never about becoming someone completely different. It was about returning to something already within you. Here is the truth. The version of you who lives as a multimillionaire is not sitting somewhere far away in the future, waiting for a certain date to arrive. The possibility of that version exists right now, just beyond the limits of what you have accepted about yourself. And this is where everything changes again. If that version already exists as a possibility, then your task is not to create it from nothing. Your task is to recognize it, to connect with it, and to begin making choices from that place. Not simply as an idea, not as empty words, but as a quiet inner recognition. Almost like remembering something you once understood, but somehow allowed yourself to forget. Most people miss this completely. They believe growth means adding more and more skills, more hours, more effort, more knowledge, more struggle. But sometimes the deeper transformation comes from removing what was never true about you in the first place, removing the constant doubt, removing the hesitation, removing the old story that keeps whispering, "I'm not there yet," because that story can become the invisible wall between you and the identity you are trying to step into. Think about this. Have you ever entered a situation and suddenly felt strangely familiar, almost as if you had already lived that moment before? Maybe you could not explain why, but something inside you felt certain. That feeling can be a glimpse of alignment, a brief moment when your deeper expectations become stronger than your old limitations. And what I am about to explain next can completely change the way you look at this process. Your mind does not have to invent every possibility from nothing. It responds to the possibilities you repeatedly focus on and the identity you repeatedly reinforce. So when you keep saying, "I am becoming a multimillionaire," you can unintentionally keep placing wealth somewhere in the distance, always ahead, always later, always almost here. But when you shift your language and your inner feeling toward "I already am," something subtle begins to happen. You stop chasing the identity and start recognizing it. Do not lose focus now, because this distinction matters. Recognition feels completely different from constant effort. Effort can feel heavy. It can feel forced. It keeps asking, "Am I there yet? How much longer? When will it happen?" Recognition is quieter. It feels calm. It says, "This is familiar. This belongs to me." And when something begins to feel familiar, your mind can accept it more naturally. This is where the shift becomes powerful, because instead of constantly trying to prove that you deserve more, you begin moving as though your worth is already understood. You make choices with less fear. You trust yourself more. You stop shrinking when you enter spaces where you once felt insignificant. Not because you are pretending to be someone else, but because you are beginning to remember a stronger version of yourself. But there is a part almost everyone overlooks. In the beginning, this new identity may not feel natural. It might even feel uncomfortable. It may sound unrealistic to the version of you that has spent years thinking the old way. And that makes sense. You have practiced being your former self for so long that the old identity can feel like absolute truth. You have repeated the same thoughts, reacted to the same fears, expected the same limits, and told yourself the same stories again and again. So when you introduce a new way of seeing yourself, your mind may resist it. But listen carefully. That discomfort does not automatically mean you are doing something wrong. It can simply mean you are stepping outside a pattern that has become familiar. Every time you return to the feeling of being that stronger version of yourself, you give less attention to the old identity and more strength to the new one. Slowly, something begins to move. Not overnight, not with some dramatic explosion. Quietly, you notice that your reactions are changing. Your standards become higher. Your tolerance for situations that constantly drain you becomes lower. You become more selective with your time, your attention, and your decisions. And then one day something surprising happens. You realize you are no longer forcing yourself to act differently. It has started becoming normal. You no longer feel like you are trying to arrive. You feel like you are already standing there. Now let me ask you something important. What if the life you have been chasing is waiting for you to remember the person you were capable of becoming all along? Not later, not after someone gives you permission, not after your circumstances finally become perfect, but now. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine waking up with that quiet certainty. No constant doubt, no endless questioning, no need to convince yourself. Just a deep, grounded knowing that says, "This is me." Feel the difference. Notice what happens inside you when you stop asking whether you are worthy and begin accepting that you are. That feeling is not something you have to dismiss simply because you cannot see the result yet. It can become a signal pointing your attention toward a different way of living. And if you return to it, practice it, and let it influence your choices, you may stop spending every day running toward some future version of yourself. Instead, you begin living from the version that has been waiting within you all along. And now comes the question that can change everything. What if much of what you are looking at right now is already outdated? Look around for a moment. Your results, your circumstances, your current income, your bank balance, your environment, it all feels real because it is right in front of you. It feels immediate. It feels solid. It can even feel final. But what if it is not a true picture of who you are becoming? What if your current circumstances are simply the delayed result of previous thoughts, previous decisions, previous habits, and previous expectations? And this is where everything shifts again. Because if your present reality is partly a delayed reflection of an older version of you, then reacting emotionally to every temporary result can keep you trapped inside the same cycle. Stay with this idea because the next part is where the real transformation begins. Doubting yourself, feeling trapped, and slowly losing hope only strengthens the old pattern that created those feelings in the first place. Most people overlook this. They look at their current situation and treat it like evidence. Evidence that they are limited. Evidence that they failed. Evidence that life will always be this way. But it is not proof. It is residue. It is the leftover effect of old thoughts, old beliefs, old choices, and old identities that were accepted somewhere along the way, either consciously or without even realizing it. Think about this carefully. Every belief you carried yesterday influenced the way you acted. Every action shaped what happened next. And those results did not appear instantly. They needed time to unfold, which means what you are seeing today may simply be the delayed result of what you were thinking and believing before. And what I'm about to explain next can completely change the way you look at your circumstances. If your present reality is delayed, then your future reality is being shaped right now by the person you believe yourself to be in this exact moment. Do not lose focus here. This is one of the most important ideas in the entire process because this is where so many people become trapped. They look at their current life and immediately say, "See, nothing is working." And the second they say that, they return to the same identity that helped create the situation they are trying to escape. The same thoughts return. The same emotional patterns return. The same expectations return. And without realizing it, they begin building another future that looks almost exactly like the past. But here is where things become interesting. The moment you stop treating your present circumstances as the final truth and start viewing them as a reflection, you gain something incredibly powerful: separation. You create space between yourself and what you are seeing. You stop reacting automatically. You stop falling into doubt. You stop letting temporary appearances define who you are. This is where the real shift begins. Because even when nothing outside you has changed, something inside you has changed. You can look at the same bank balance without letting it determine your worth. You can face the same problem without immediately deciding that you are defeated. You can stand in the same environment, surrounded by the same circumstances, and still think, choose, and respond from a completely different identity. And the difference matters more than you may realize. But here is the part almost everyone overlooks. There will often be a gap. There can be a period when your internal identity has changed, but your external circumstances have not caught up yet. And inside that gap, doubt can become very loud. It starts whispering, maybe this isn't working. Maybe nothing is changing. Maybe you are fooling yourself. Maybe this is simply who you are. But listen carefully. That voice belongs to the old pattern. It is an echo of the past trying to keep you connected to something that is already beginning to fade. Do not automatically believe it, because every time you continue holding the new identity, even when the outside world has not changed, you are strengthening something beneath the surface. You are building a new way of thinking, choosing, and responding. At first, it may be invisible. You may not have anything obvious to show for it, but invisible does not mean meaningless. Imagine that you remain consistent. You stop reacting to every appearance. You stop checking for proof every few minutes. You continue choosing the version of yourself who thinks, acts, and decides from abundance. Days pass, then weeks, and eventually something begins to move. An opportunity appears. A new connection develops. A door opens that you never expected. A decision becomes clear. Something that seemed impossible suddenly becomes available. It may look random from the outside, but it can be the result of many small internal changes, finally producing different actions and different outcomes. So understand this deeply. What you see today does not have to become your permanent limit. It can simply be a reflection of an older version of you that you are no longer required to remain. And if you can hold that awareness, if you can stop reacting and start choosing, then your future stops being something you merely wish for. It becomes something you are actively setting in motion right now. Stay with me, because there is another piece of this that explains why so many people repeat the right words and still feel completely stuck. You have said the words before, so why didn't anything change? Be honest with yourself. You repeated affirmations. You whispered powerful statements. You told yourself, this is who I am now. Maybe you said it every morning. Maybe you wrote it down. Maybe you repeated it again and again. Yet nothing seemed to move. Nothing felt different. Nothing transformed the way you expected. Eventually you started asking yourself, what am I missing? But here is the truth. It was never simply about the words. It was about the feeling underneath those words. Because you can say something powerful while secretly doubting every part of it. The sentence may sound right. It may look inspiring on paper, but internally there can still be hesitation. And that hesitation changes the experience completely. This is where everything shifts, because your mind is influenced not only by what you say, but by what you repeatedly accept as true. That is why two people can repeat the exact same sentence and experience something completely different internally. One person says it without feeling anything. The other says it with genuine conviction, and that conviction changes the way they think, behave, and respond. Most people miss this part. They concentrate on repetition instead of belief. They think that if they repeat something enough times, eventually it must work. But repetition without genuine belief can become nothing more than noise. It becomes mechanical, empty, automatic. It may sound powerful on the outside, while nothing meaningful is changing within. And the missing ingredient is conviction, certainty, not forced certainty, not pretending, not shouting at yourself until you believe something. Real certainty is much quieter than that. It does not need to prove itself. It does not need constant approval. It feels more like a calm inner knowing that says, I understand who I am. Do not lose focus now, because this distinction is incredibly important. When you genuinely experience something with certainty, even for a brief moment, it can leave a strong impression on your mind. You may suddenly feel different without knowing exactly why. Your posture changes, your thoughts become calmer, your decisions become clearer. You stop fighting so hard to convince yourself. Something inside you simply recognizes the possibility as real. Not because you have already collected every piece of evidence, but because for a moment you experience the feeling of it as true. And that experience can become the beginning of a new pattern. The goal is not to repeat empty words endlessly. The deeper goal is to create a believable inner state that changes the way you see yourself. Because once the way you see yourself begins to change, the way you move through the world begins to change with it. And that is where the next level of this transformation begins.